Hello, everyone. We are Yesshift, and I'm Steven Schinder, and this is Dan Schinder, my dad.
That's
And
right.
yeah, we're celebrating the 35th anniversary of the album Anderson Bruford Wakeman Howe by the band Anderson Bruford Wakeman Howe.
That's right. Isn't
So,
that weird how they did that?
yeah.
That literally is a self-titled album. And you know what? I'm going to start off by saying, I know people are going to hate on me for this, but well, no, first I'll start with this. It's a great album. It's still a great album. 35 years. I had a long drive home from San Diego Monday, driving home to the mountains in Arizona where I live. And I listened to it twice, all the way through, beginning to end, and then starting over. It's still a great album, but I'm going to say this. Um, I wonder if I am in the minority by saying this. I don't know. Steve, you have a probably better beat on the fandom where this is concerned, but it's not a Yes album. It doesn't have the Yes logo. It doesn't say Yes anywhere on it. It's not a Yes album. It doesn't even sound like Yes. And one of my qualifications for one of my qualifications for this is that I don't see where it slots in as a Yes album. You know, as wacky sometimes as the Yes musical path is, you know, going from talk to open your eyes, and this to me doesn't fit anywhere as a Yes album. It's not a Yes album. It has members who were in Yes and they are playing together, but I don't think it's a Yes album.
Right. Yeah. So,
sorry.
I'm glad you're getting that out of the way because I think this is a question that pops up a lot, and
it's
to
a
the point where
one.
I'm kind of tired of the question. But yeah, like going into making the album, they weren't intending for it to be a Yes album. In fact, you can find interviews from the era where Bill Bruford and maybe a couple of the others are very adamant that this is a separate entity. It's not Yes. And then it's kind of funny if you watch that interview and then you fast forward to the Yes Years documentary or the behind the scenes footage of that era, you kind of feel a bit bad because like Bill has been dragged back into the world of rock. He's like, I keep getting dragged back into these things.
Yeah, it's funny, but you know, it's his decision whether or not to be dragged. Oh, in all fairness, Bill, but it's wonderful, amazing music with Yes members, but it is not a Yes album, period.
Right. Like it did retroactively get put into the discography. I think part of that was that Arista Records, you know, which made this album, also acquired Yes, and then
I think someone just threw their hands up. Okay, whatever. Let's just do this. You know, I think that's what happened.
Yeah, like even though it's not a Yes album, it's still an integral part of Yes's history because it was a catalyst for a union, and it's
absolutely
the whole thing.
And bringing, like, Bill is the X factor there, you know, because Steve and Rick had been in the band. Rick had been in the band 7 times or whatever by then. To bring Bill back was
7 times.
something like that. To bring Bill, thank you very much. To bring Bill back really was like, what's going to go on here? What is this going to sound like? And as a drummer, as a producer, as someone extremely attuned to different drummers' drum sounds and Bill's other stuff, Earthworks and the Bruford band, Bruford, all that. The first thing that blew my mind is from the song you played in the opening. When the drums come in, it's not the classic Bill Bruford sound. It's something light years in some other direction with that loud, gated, crashy snare drum instead of his real tight boom, you know, and that I think surprised a lot of people who are really into what Bill brought to Close to the Edge and You and I and Fragile. You know, that snare drum sound is such an integral part of that iteration of Yes. And then they get these guys back together. He's, hey, got some new toys. Check out this sound. And I think that that along with a lot of the sounds Rick used, and even Steve using mostly a Stratocaster and not the typical ES-175 and 335 hollow body sounds, really created a whole new sound that was never a Yes sound collectively. And quite frankly, I think that there are parts of the album where that snare drum is too loud. And I'm surprised that, like, I wish I was a fly on the wall during the mixing session to see if Bill pushed for that, or if John was so high on this new sound, he said, make the snare drum louder, or if Rick was just like, who I don't know how that went down, but in some areas, even as much as I love it and I'm a drummer, it's too loud. But collectively, this is a one-off record by a one-off collective artist with a one-off sound, with the exception of some of the sounds, like that snare drum of Bill's, bled onto some of the stuff that ended up on Union, like Shock to the System, I Would Have Waited Forever. But that's a new sound for Bill, and that's when it got introduced on this album. So that's my take on it and why it's not a Yes album, other than the fact that they say it's not a Yes album.
Right. I think I've heard the story that they considered the band name Affirmative and even the name No, or like, I don't know if this is a rumor, but maybe maybe that was a possibility. But
perhaps.
Oh yeah, that's
perhaps would be good.
Yeah. But yeah, let's delve into a bit more of the context of how this came together. Like, what was going on in this era of prog rock and these members in general?
I love when we do the celebrations, the anniversaries of albums, and Steve gets all the credit for putting the context together. And I love this aspect because it really, for those of us that were alive, it takes us back. For me anyways, it's like, oh yeah, wow, that was the same year as this. Like, all I'm thinking of is, okay, so this is where there was this funk going on and this faction was doing this thing, this faction was doing that thing. I was sort of recently with your mother, not that long. Your brother was being gestated. I mean, it's just like these weird memories that come through. And Alan White used to live where I grew up, and I didn't grow up in a wealthy area. He was very, very humble, down to earth guy. And in West Coast, California, I remember when this came out and I'd be listening to it to and from my parents' house. If I had it on and I was driving by his house, I felt like it was disrespectful and I would turn it down. It was like I was cheating on him or something.
Yeah, I don't think you've told me that before. That's
funny.
Wow.
Because like right around that time is when, they met Billy Sherwood, and then they started working with Roger Hodgson. Chris had moved to Phoenix. They started rehearsing it. Like, all that kind of stuff was going on. So two things were happening. Yeah, it was just a weird thing. But yeah, go. You launch it with the context. We'll trade off paragraphs here.
Right. So starting with John Anderson. So in 1986, so this would have been around the time of Big Generator, John had worked on demos with Vangelis. Some would go on to be on Page of Life 5 years later, and some would go unused, I believe. But one of these unused, these demos that was not used by John and Vangelis, I don't think, was an early version of Let's Pretend. And I think John even had that uploaded to his YouTube channel not too long ago, and you can definitely feel the John and Vangelis-ness of that version. And they also did Distant Thunder, which would be reworked with ABWH, but not used for the album. And then eventually that would become Children of Light on Keys to Ascension.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd also, in 86, he also recorded his own solo demos, which would end up on the Lost Tapes box set. And one of them was called The Meaning of Your Love, which would become The Meeting. So Anderson left Yes after the Big Generator tour. On the album, there's been the story about how it felt like he was kind of at first he was not brought into the studio with them. It was like they kind of wanted him to come in a little later, and then there's all sorts of things happening with the album. So, um, I guess to him it felt like the vibes weren't really there. So he left the band, and in 1988 he released a pop solo album titled "In the City of Angels," and he even guested on Toto's "Stop Loving You," adding some backing vocals there. And so his wife at the time, Jennifer, suggested he reunite with Yes alumni. So he had Bruford, Howe, and Wakeman meet up with him, and they were each under the impression they'd be working on a John Anderson solo album. And I guess we're surprised when they all bumped into each other.
Yeah, yeah. He didn't tell them that, yeah, and Rick is going to be there too, and Steve, interesting. And Howe had done GTR a couple years prior, early versions of what would end up becoming Quartet, and Birthright would later appear on his homebrew collection. And
yeah, and Brother of Mine too. I forgot to put that part.
Oh, okay. And Bill had released the first Earthworks album in 1987. Wow, I thought that was like even longer ago than that. That's interesting.
Yeah. And Rick Wakeman was ever busy with his 1988 to 89 solo output, including A Suite of Gods, Zodiac, The Word and the Gospels, Black Knight at the Court of Ferdinand IV, and Sea Airs.
I don't want to hear it. That guy's lazy. Next.
Jeff Downes had released his debut solo album, The Light Program, in 1987. We talked about that one on the show a while back.
Mm-hmm.
The Moody Blues released Sur la Mer in June 1988, and that was the last album by them where Mraz would play with them on the whole thing. On the album after, he'd all play on a bit of it, but not the whole thing.
Trevor Horn, he had been helping making hits. I never heard of these bands, working notably with Pet Shop Boys, Simple Minds, Rod Stewart, and Paul McCracken. Oh, Paul McCartney.
Yeah, I think it was Paul's birthday the other day, actually.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Genesis were on hiatus, during which time Mike and the Mechanics would release Living Years in October of 1988, and Tony Banks would release Banks Statement. What's a tatement? What's a tatement? Bank Statement in August of 1989, and Phil Collins would release But Seriously in November of 1989. But wait, there's more.
Right. And so also going on in the prog world, Rush had released Hold Your Fire in 1987 and released Presto in 1989. In 1989, summer and autumn, John Wetton and Carl Palmer had reformed Asia for a tour with John Young on keys, Alan Darby on guitar, and Zoe Nicholas and Susie Webb on backing vocals. That was kind of an obscure period of Asia. Like, you don't even have Jeff involved in that live.
Is that the one? Is that the album? I don't remember if Jeff is on what I'm going to refer to.
There's no album for this. This was pre Then and Now.
Okay. I was thinking of the song that John wrote with David Cassidy, which actually kills. It's great.
Okay.
You know which one I'm referring to? I think it's on Then and Now.
Not off the top of my head.
Might have been the first track. I just can't think of the name. But Trevor Rabin would release Can't Look Away. Great song, great album in July of 1989 and go on tour. And Jethro Tull would release Rock Island in August of 89. And I want to, hey, Joe Waller, thanks for chiming in. Folks, chime in. Let us know what you think of this album. But Steve, I want to ask you something. I've always found this image curious. What do you think there's a message here? Like, what photographer says, you look that way, you look this way, you look at me.
You're showing a photo of the ABWH members and they're looking in different directions.
Yeah, if you're listening to the audio only podcast. So do you think there's a musical message there that they all came together with different visions, or they were looking to go somewhere different or anything like that? Or is it just some weird ass pose that the photographer came up with?
I mean, they were probably asked to look in these directions they're looking, but I don't know, maybe it's a little reference to Tormato where they're also looking in different directions, just different lineup, you know?
Yeah, it's just odd. They all, because of it, they all seem completely disconnected from each other. And Steve's the only one you feel a connection with because he's looking right at the camera. I just think it's weird.
Hmm. Yeah, I never really thought about it that much. Interesting.
And then can we examine the art before we go into the track list and stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me pull up where the photo went on my screen.
Yeah,
Oh,
they
there we go.
got a little known artist named Roger Dean. I don't know if he had any experience before this, but I think
I
they
think
did pretty well with that guy.
he was an apprentice or something.
Yeah.
Really cool album cover, but what was really revealing is the actual full piece of art. And what I'm going to show you next, folks, is even more revealing. Hearing aid falling out is the scale of this. Steve is 6 feet, 6'1", and this thing's huge. This was during the filming of the documentary we did on
the Secret Path exhibit. Yeah.
Right, in San Francisco, Roger and Freya Dean's respective exhibit, and a lot of original Yes album covers and other album covers were there. And this one was one of those you turn the corner moments and go, whoa! It was like, whoa, it's so big. Whereas Relayer was about this big. It was literally only this big. And this thing, so it's interesting to me that the way he can create in different sizes and still have the same, effect.
Yeah. And I think another point toward this not being a Yes album is that even though they brought back Roger Dean, it still feels like he was trying to do a different visual identity for this album. You know, it had been 8-9 years since Drama and Classic Yes after that as well, but
it doesn't have the signature curvature soft feel that a lot of his other stuff had until then, and the font is different as well.
Yeah, and I think he would adapt some of these aspects to future Yes albums, but at that time this looks different from the classic Yes stuff and from Asia as well.
Yeah.
So I thought it was really cool the way he was able to use this as a visual identity for ABWH, and I'm sure that the artwork for Union would have been used as well, and that to me feels really different from this, funny enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's play a little bit more of a clip from the tour, and then we'll go through the track list. This happens to be how the show didn't open. Sorry, it's not how the show opened, but it's the first track on the album is what I meant to say.
Right.
Themes. So Steve's going to skip through the video and just show some snippets. And folks, give us your take in the comments.
Yeah, and this is from Middletown, and I think August 9th, 1989.
Can you be more specific?
It was in the North Hemisphere. I don't know. I'll just play it and skip through it. Skip through a bit more.
Tony Levin back there getting down.
Yeah. Tony always looks like he's having a good time.
Absolutely.
bit of Mr. Howe. Yeah, it's just such an energetic song.
It is.
Yeah.
And there's some, you know, I always wondered, I want to bring this up and get your take and anyone else that wants to chime in. I don't know why they didn't include Tony Levin as a name, because his sound is so distinct. And he's also a big reason why this doesn't sound like a Yes album. It doesn't have Chris's voice, doesn't have Chris's Rickenbacker or Fender sound. And yet, and he's not like Tony was unknown. Jeez, he
Right,
was
you know, King
Peter Gabriel's
Crimson,
bass
Peter
player his
Gabriel.
whole career, you know, and King
Yeah.
Crimson. So I don't know why they didn't. I don't know. Thoughts on
Well, yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. So I do kind of wonder if maybe part of it is that they would prefer that the writers of the songs be the band members, and I don't think Tony Levin wrote anything here, you know, and that might be a silly reason because there are bands where one of the band members doesn't write on any of the songs on the album, but they're
Right.
still a band member.
Or two or three of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and another thing is they ended up naming themselves Anderson Bruford Wakeman Howe, so like do they add his name as well, and that makes it longer, and at which point they should have just gone with a different shorter name and had
Or
Tony
I
Levin
don't
be an
know.
official
They
band
could have
member.
put his name first and it'd be pronounced Labwa.
Oh yeah, that did
Labwa.
come to mind. Like, yeah.
But Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe, and Levin. I don't know. You're right. It is longer, but I don't know if that's the reason. I don't know. I think he should have been included.
Yeah, because he is very much a presence in this music, and part of why this feels different from Yes music.
Yeah, between him playing the stick and the fretless bass, it's a whole different sound.
Yeah. So, and I remember an interview with John. He said that at first they, you know, when they were trying to figure out the order of the names, at first they're like Anderson, Wakeman, Bruford, Howe, but then they were told to switch to Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe because Anderson, Wakeman, Bruford is AWB, which is American White Band. So
average white band, yeah,
or average white band, yeah.
Yeah, because they're just average.
Yeah.
They're actually amazing.
Right. So it's kind of funny, like the thinking that goes into the branding, but
yeah, absolutely.
But if Tony Levin had been considered an official member, then would they have had to? Because you know, during the tour, Tony Levin got ill, so they canceled a few shows before they got Jeff Berlin to fill in for him. But if Levin's name is in the band name, would they have had to not go with Jeff Berlin and just wait till Tony's back?
I think they may have still done what they did. There are other bands where someone has substituted, even for an entire tour.
Okay, because there were a few shows on the tour which they canceled because John got ill for a bit. So it's like, and I know some people might be like, well, it's tougher to substitute for John, but yeah, I don't know, like that possibility came to mind.
Question. So I saw them in San Diego with Jeff, and that was the first time I met Jeff. We had
Jeff Berlin or the other Jeff.
Jeff okay. Berlin. Yeah, we had access to backstage after the show, and I met Bill for the first time, and he actually went and got Jeff. Or no. Rick introduced us to Jeff, and met Jeff Berlin, and then years later, folks, last year, I asked Jeff Berlin to be my co-host for the Drum Talk TV 10-year anniversary. And he said, why do you, I'm flattered, but why do you want me? I said, because the other 43 people said no, or they were busy. But no, the reason really is because Stephen and I had recently interviewed Jeff, and we just got on so well. And he's just such a smart guy and great conversationalist. And I wanted a bass player. I didn't want another drummer to unpack the Drum Talk TV story. I wanted like a musical cousin or brother, if you will. And Jeff is just really good at conversation. I thought he'd be perfect to ask the questions and comment on the history of Drum Talk TV. So that's how Jeff ended up on board, and he got to jam with us and jammed with AD for a couple things and did the all jam at the end of the concert part. That's all coming out real soon, folks. But Jeff nailed it. He had like literally, I think he said in our interview, I think he said he had like 2 days or something to learn everything, something
Yeah,
like that.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
And he
going
was
back
great.
to but going back to Tony Levin,
Yeah.
if he was an official member and the union thing still happened, would they have had him play on the tour as
No,
well?
no, because he was only on one album.
Okay.
See, like Pat wasn't there, Trevor Horn wasn't there. You know what I mean? It's more like these are the 2 legacy lineups.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay.
Do you think that I have this other question. Let me think. I'm just looking through like what I've written down. So do you think that ABWH could have stayed intact but still toured with Yes as like 2 separate acts, and maybe they come together for an encore instead of like the 2 merging into Yes?
Like the encore being what we saw with Union.
Yeah, like I don't know if the different record companies would have made that difficult or what.
Or the management. And I'm not sure they were getting along at that point.
Right.
I mean, eventually they did Union.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
I mean,
so, I don't know. I think at that point they were all on just 2 separate missions.
yeah. Yeah, so it basically boiled down to management and people kind of forcing them to work together and be the union lineup.
Yeah.
So.
And the thing, I think it's a little unfair, even though it's an internal thing as well. Billy has said it to us. Trevor has said it to us. I've heard John say it. The whole Yes West label, I understand that, why it's Yes West, but it implies that there was another Yes at the same time. And there wasn't. There was ABWH, not another Yes. When they had Patrick Moraz, they didn't call it Yes Euro. You know?
Yeah, I mean, people did nickname ABWH Yes East at the time. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a strange thing.
Yeah. But to answer your question, I don't think it would have happened, and that's why we didn't see it happen.
Okay. Yeah. And
I'll show the album cover again while I go through the track list. How's that?
Yeah.
So there's Steve with the album. And then let's click through to right there. There we go. And I'm going to go through the set list. We've got Themes, Sound, Second Attention, Soul Warrior are all different movements of that. That clocks in just under 6 minutes. Fist of Fire. We're going to talk about some alternative takes in a moment, Steve, right?
Yeah.
We got Fist of Fire at 3.5 minutes, roughly. Brother of Mine, which is made up of The Big Dream, Nothing Can Come Between Us, Long Lost Brother of Mine. And that's 10 minutes and 16 seconds. I had forgotten that Jeff Downs wrote that, right?
Yeah, he co-wrote the Long Lost Brother of Mine section.
Yeah, I forgot about that. And then you got Birthright, co-written with Max Bacon.
Yeah, like a couple of these writing credits are from the GTR era, I believe.
Yeah. Birthright, The Meeting, and Quartet. Then you've got Quartet makes up I Want to Learn, She Gives Me Love, Who Was the First, I'm Alive. And Ben Downing wrote She Gives Me Love, or was a co-writer. Then we've got Teak Boy, which is a cool song. It's a French word spelled Teakbois. Teak Bois. It's probably really pronounced Teak Bois. Rock Gives Courage, the rock out song on the album. It's So Hard to Grow.
It's called Order of the Universe, and it begins with Order Theme.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Yeah, I skipped that. Order of the Universe is made up of order theme. Rock gives courage. It's so hard to grow. The universe. Rhett Lawrence helped write Rock Gives Courage, and Let's Pretend by Vangelis closes it out. Do you have a favorite before we dive into the alternate universe versions?
Right. So I've kind of gone back and forth. I know that when I first listened to this album, well, first, like in 2007 was when the DVD of the concert film, An Evening of Yes Music Plus, was coming out from Voice Print. And so I got that and I got familiar with a few of the songs on there. But because I'd never heard the ABWH songs to my knowledge prior to that, I was like, okay, when does this song end and the other one begin? I'm kind of confused here. But eventually I listened to the whole album, in the late 2000s. And during that period, I was in middle school, and my favorite song on the album was Brother of Mine, because it had such
about Alex.
It had like a lot of optimism to it, which was something I was craving from music at the time. But I think over the years it's kind of changed. Fist of Fire is pretty cool. It's got a lot of, it's very bombastic, but I think right now I feel like Themes might be my favorite on the album. It kind of has a little bit of everything and the amount of time that it goes for. What about you?
Yeah, I have two: Themes and the first two movements of Quartet. I want to.
Oh yeah, that's a lovely song.
And She Gives Me Love. I love She Gives Me Love. I just love that.
Yeah. Do you remember where you were when you first listened to this album? Or had you heard a bit of it on the radio first?
No. I want to say I probably bought it and threw it right in my car CD. I'm sure, and so what car was I driving when I first met your mom? I was driving a Dodge Colt. Yeah, which ended up being her car. You probably don't remember that car. It might have been gone. It might have been totally pre-Steven, now that I think about it.
Right, yeah.
Oh, and I had a white, it was burgundy, and I also had a white Buick Century. That's probably what I had when it came out. And what I listened to it in, probably just driving around the corner from the record store. We used to have record stores, people. There were these stores, you go in and there'd be records for sale, cassettes for sale, and eventually CDs for sale. And before all that, they also had 8-track. Anyhow. Oh, I took pictures of 8-tracks for you. We were talking about them the other day. And when I was at the Del Mar Fair with Alex and Arlene, it's a retro theme. So this one room had all this retro stuff. And there was this design made out of 8-tracks glued onto something. I took a picture. I forgot to send that to you.
Okay. Yeah, I remember we've talked about this last year, how over here in LA, there's Amoeba Music. I think it's actually in the Hollywood area.
Is it still there?
Yeah. And
Wow.
at the time I spotted a couple versions of like ABWH on vinyl, but I ended up getting Tales on vinyl from there as well. And yeah, we talked about that last year. But I kind of do wish I'd gotten ABWH as well. So maybe at some point I'll visit that place again, see if they have it. Of course, now that I've said it, someone's probably gonna like drive over there right now and get it. So
you know what? Now I'm wondering if I got the vinyl and not the CD. When did the CD get issued? Can you check that real quick?
Well, the CD came out like pretty much right away, I believe. Okay. They took advantage of
then I got the CD.
Of the like amount of space they could use. Like this album clocks in at about an hour.
With a miniature album cover art.
Yeah.
That's the trade-off.
Yeah. What's funny is in 2009, I think, I was visiting family. So I was with mom and she was driving and I put in the ABWH CD, and as Themes was playing, I was kind of surprised to hear her sing along to it, because it's probably had been forever since she had heard the song, but
Oh
some
wow.
of the lyrics came back to her second nature, like I only believe in you. So
Really?
yeah.
Wow, what a trip.
Yeah. And the CD that I have somewhere around here, I was looking for it earlier, as I mentioned to you before the show, is the reissue from I think it was the late 2000s, and it has like various edits, like edits of Brother and Mine and Order of the Universe, and a couple live tracks, the Distant Thunder demo. There's a Rick Wakeman intro as well, and Vultures in the City, which is the B side of
Oh,
the Brother of Mine single. So, what are your thoughts on Vultures in the City? And if they could include it on the album, where do you think would have been a nice place to put it?
oh boy. Um, I'm gonna say, where would it go on the album? I'm gonna start with that. I think right after I got this song in my head. I got the track list right here. What's wrong with me? Right after Fist of Fire. I think it goes really
Oh,
well
okay.
with, it's kind of in the same vein, you think?
Yeah, that's funny. I kind of feel like it's in the similar vein to Birthright. So I
Oh,
think I would
interesting.
put it before Birthright, maybe.
Okay. Okay, that's fair. I like the track. Um, the other two, I think, and I know it's easy to get accustomed to the version you've been listening to for 35 years, but the other two I like, I appreciate. I think they're way too busy. I like that they dialed them way back for what ended up on the actual album.
Wait, which one do you mean?
Um, the I got to pull up your email. I don't have the titles off the top of my head,
Oh,
but
okay.
the ones
So
I listened to. Oh, I know. I could just backspace. Hold on.
so you're talking about "I'm Alive," the
Yeah,
single from
yeah,
Quartet, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I thought
and
that was too busy, and I also thought that
the
yeah,
alternate version of "Fist of Fire" that was put on "In a Word Yes" in
yeah.
2010.
I just think there's too much going on there. It's almost like, I was a little surprised when our wonderful friend in his wonderful book about Tormato said that on Tormato it sounds like Rick and Steve are battling for space. That never occurred to me. That's what these two versions sound like. Everyone's just playing over each other, and there's too much going on. When they subtracted all that, and there you go again, addition by subtraction, it created more space and it lets the composition breathe and come through rather than
Interesting.
rather than four extra layers of let me sustain some notes and play some other pad and do some other dinking on top of everything that none of that needed to be there.
Oh, I feel like I have like the opposite opinions. So
Really?
yeah, so Fist of Fire, you can hear a bit more of the guitar, which I mean makes sense because like Steve Howe was helping put together that box set, and I do really like it. I don't know if it's because it was like hearing a different version
And
of the
maybe you like
song.
all the extra stuff, the more sonic layers. It could be that.
Yeah, and for I'm Alive, I'd actually heard that single version before I listened to the album version of Quartet. So when I listened to Quartet and got to that I'm Alive section, it kind of felt lackluster to
Oh,
me.
that's
And
funny.
also like that fourth section feels like a separate song and kind of not um as connected to the first three parts
Totally.
of the song.
I
And
agree.
I feel like the single version kind of has more optimism that I really love and lifts me up and whatnot. So I don't know. I appreciate the extra layers and the drums and stuff on that. And yeah, I don't know. I just really like these versions.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Where does the go ahead. I have one last question when you're ready.
Oh,
And then we'll do fan stuff.
yeah, I was just gonna say, Fist of Fire is the only song that they did not play on the tour. They
Right.
played Quartet and Let's Pretend on the first show and then dropped them shortly after, I think. And Teak Boy, like only a tiny bit of that made it into the John Anderson solo medley thing, or I guess yes slash ABWH medley, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Where does the album cover rank for you? I have to say, not amongst Yes album covers, because it's not a Yes album, but amongst Roger's work.
Well, I think seeing it in person definitely added more perspective. So I think it might potentially be in top 10, maybe even top 5. Like, I think it's really high
Same.
up there.
Yeah, same. When you look at all the detail and intricacies and the new shapes that we see with that we didn't see before. I should pull it up again real quick. Let me see. One sec, folks, just so you know what we're referring to in case you're just joining us. Oh no, did I close that folder? Hold on. There we go. Okay, let me share it now. When we talk about the details and the intricacies, this is on a very big canvas. So, and Steve's a lot taller than I am. Steve's, what are you, 6 foot, 6'1"?
6 feet.
Yeah. So that's a nice canvas to create all of that on. And then as I zoom in, just the amount of detail. Look at the shadows and the rocks, the shadows below this tree on the ground. You've got this thing. I mean, it's so symmetrical, and the use of light and shadows is just mind-blowing in his work.
Yeah, and it definitely feels like late 80s Roger Dean. Like some of the video game stuff he contributed to was kind of this, some of this style.
Yeah.
Another question I want to ask you was, would you rearrange the track order in any way? Because we've talked about Big Generator and how you've always found that ending on Holy Lamb, which is kind of a lighter song, was kind of lackluster to you. Here we have Let's Pretend, and I think that's even more light than Holy Lamb. And
yeah,
I don't think it's necessarily the best track to end this with. So if you could rearrange a track order, how would you do it?
It's the only thing I would change. I would put Let's Pretend right after Quartet, let it cool all the way down, and then launch into Teak Boy, and then hit it hard on the way out with Order of the Universe. That's a perfect freaking set list. If you don't believe me, just ask me.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I was kind of wondering if maybe end with Teak Boy, but I know that the song is maybe a little mixed among fans, so maybe ending with Order of the Universe would be better. But then again, Order of the Universe does end with that wind down where it's like the chimes and the gongs. So I kind of wonder if that would have to be cut out. So
no, I think that's okay. To me, it's not about the last note being a big bash. It's about the last composition and what that facilitates. And I think even with that cool down at the end, that's a great way to like running hard and then okay, we're out, we're done. I think it's still perfect. I really do.
Okay, yeah, because I feel like the wind down does make a good segue into Let's Pretend, but Let's Pretend still feels too light of an ending for me. So that's why I was kind of wondering if maybe Teak Boy could work as an ending, but I don't know.
And Magnification, same thing. Magnification ends with
Time is Time.
Yeah, I love the song. I just, for my sensibilities, don't like ending an album like that. Because after a song like that, I always have like, okay, what's next? Oh, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think to me, Holy Lamb is more bombastic than either of those. But
In
Yeah,
a
I don't know,
way.
like,
In a
yeah,
way.
but you're not alone. Like multiple people have said time is time kind of feels like an afterthought after you go through the journey of in the presence of, like, that
Yeah,
feels like a great closer.
exactly. I agree. So
Yeah.
cool. Let's read some fan stuff. I'll start if that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, Brian O'Sullivan says, bought it on the release day at Record Theater on the west side of Baltimore. As I walked into the store, they were playing the entire album. Caught the tour in early August at Meriwether Post Pavilion, was in line early since we had lawn seats, and we got to watch John Anderson arrive in his limo. He waved to all of us in line. Was my first time seeing Bruford, Howe, and Wakeman play Yes music, and at the time, a possibility I thought I had missed out on given the state of Yes at the time. Interesting. That's awesome.
Yeah, and Lee Pilgrim says, I was 7 when I first heard this album. Still one of my all time favorites. Highlights include Brother of Mine and the extended version of I'm Alive. I was really into Bruford's electric drums and enjoyed their live version of Heart of a Sunrise, which ironically was the first time I heard that song.
Oh,
Interesting.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and they also had like the music videos for Brother of Mine and I'm
Yes,
Alive. That they were kind of strange, very
I
of the
agree.
time, I guess.
Yeah. Scott Kennerson says, wow, 35 years. Seems like yesterday I saw that tour. I agree. It's flown by. And I think the music is still very relevant. It could come out today and still sound ahead of its time a bit. I really believe that.
You don't think the drum sound might sound like from a while ago?
That's a good point. Oh, you just screwed me up. Um, it to me, it would sound like bringing something back
Okay.
because the rest of the music, the sounds that Rick is using, and I guess Steve's guitar sounds very early 90s. A lot of that stuff happened, but I'm not saying it wouldn't sound a bit dated, but I just think it's still relevant.
Okay.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Um, Alex Alila says, great album, some very well written pieces. And Spenny Bolin says, I caught the tour in Edinburgh Playhouse, magnificent night of music.
Oh, that's awesome.
Nice. Yeah, I also had another question for you, Dad.
Okay.
So we already covered like whether or not this is a Yes album, but to you, does this sound more like a Yes album or more like a John Anderson album? Because this question has been tossed around
I
here and there online
I
before.
don't think it sounds like a John Anderson album
Hmm.
because of the other guys that are also on it.
Okay. Yeah, because there is a lot of Steve in quartet, and I think the fact that they each insert enough of themselves into the music makes
Yeah.
it feel less like a John solo album.
Yeah,
But
Rick's sounds and finger work is definitely so Wakeman. It sounds more like a collaboration to me than either
yeah,
Yes or John.
but by that same token, I could imagine Let's Pretend or maybe some version of Teak Boy being on a John Anderson album. In fact, Teak Boy could fit on In the City of Angels, but I think for the most part, definitely feels like a band album.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it feels closer to Yes or closer to John. It's hard to say because John dabbles in a lot of things and even different cultures. So maybe the cultural aspect is why people think of Anderson with this.
Maybe.
Um, and with the latter as well, there's similarities there in a way. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Let's see, I had another thought. I'm trying to remember what it was. Um, yeah, I don't know. I had it and then it just flew away.
Okay. That
But
happens to me all the time.
I know that when Union was being made, before that came together, the band members were, in ABWH. There's this interview with Jonathan Elias where it seemed like it was tough to get them to work on the new materials. So
Right.
hence John and Jonathan getting the session musicians. So sometimes I do kind of wonder what it would have been like if they had let that second ABWH album maybe cook for a bit longer, maybe another year if that was a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the material, there's the stuff that ended up on Union, and John Anderson also had a bunch of demos. So theoretically, if they were to use everything, there could have been like 2 or 3 more albums. But being that some of them were a lot of John demos, I mean, realistically, they would have had to cherry pick some of those. So maybe just 2 more albums.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like a road that we can't really see or know the full thing. If
It's hard to imagine.
If cinema had been a thing and they had not gotten John Anderson back, do you think that this little reunion with John and Howe and Bruford and Wakeman would have still happened?
And would have that been called Yes?
Oh yeah, like would they have had to get Chris, and would Alan have been part of it? Like I don't know.
Well, Alan was in cinema.
Right, yeah.
And Chris.
Yeah.
So maybe it would have been Yes, and Tony Levin would have been the second bass player to ever join Yes.
Yeah, it really makes you think like what would have been like the hoops it would have had to go through,
and how many times would Rick had left and come back?
Yeah, because I think Bill's condition was that it not be called Yes. So maybe it would have still had a different name from Yes.
Yeah, and I don't think he was into making albums and touring, in the fashion that people would have expected out of that had it sustained,
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. So 35 years of ABWH, Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe, with Tony Levin on bass, and a great tour. And it was fun talking about this album. It was fun revisiting the music recently on my drive home from San Diego. And folks, if you're watching or listening to the archive, please go ahead and comment on whatever channel you're seeing this from, whether it's on Yesshift on YouTube or Facebook, or Drum Talk TV on Facebook or YouTube, or on anchor.fm. Let us know what you think. Chime in with our topics.
Yeah, for sure. And I also want to mention, because I forgot to bring this up the other day when I talked about the Emerson, Lake and Palmer singles. I was recently a guest on a podcast called How Star Wars Is It? And it's a podcast where we compare, or like, the hosts of that podcast, they compare various things to Star Wars and rate them on a scale from 1 to 10 based on how Star Wars they are. So, different movies and shows, music, and even like odd things like, I don't know, weather, pizza, like random stuff like that. So we talked about Yes, and they were unfamiliar. So there were times where I had to like sort of fill them in on some of the history. But because I wanted to get the show going, there were times when I felt like, oh, I feel like I'm like omitting like some of the nuances of the history, but we gotta keep this going. I don't want to like overwhelm them with too much info, because the history of Yes is there's so much of it. But yeah, it was sillier than what you might expect from our show, but it was a lot of fun.
Cool. I'll be listening to it later.
Yeah. Oh, and I do remember what I forgot to say a moment ago. The whole, ABWH being a band album, it kind of like reminds me of what's going on now with John and the Band Geeks, where if, when we had Richie Castellano on our show recently, he mentioned how their approach is to make a band album and to not necessarily try to sound like a Yes album. So it's interesting how there are parallels there. And, I'm sure people have also drawn parallels with like the ARW situation several years ago, but it's interesting how certain things sort of repeat in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for watching, everybody. And if you have suggestions or questions, you can write us at yesshiftpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like audio only podcasts, you can listen to us at anchor.fm/yesshift. However, you'll miss out on seeing video clips and pictures and things that we show. But if that's your thing, we're there. and there's a buy Stephen new shoes button or something like that there. And if you're watching on Trump Talk TV, thank you very much. If you're watching on Yesshift's other channels, thank you very much. And we'll be back soon.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.